begin. Okay, welcome everybody to the post-miracle session. It is really very humbling. I don't know how to say it. It's very humbling to say, like, we're still here. You know, that the country may be a little bit shaken up, but the very next day, I have a friend who went to a wedding, and they actually closed the schools on Sunday. So Sunday is a regular weekday here, and they closed the schools Sunday and the gyms and the library and some other municipal things. But by Monday, everything was pretty much back to normal. And Israel is an extremely resilient country and culture. And okay, and with that, let's get started with our letter. Okay, this is the next letter in our journey through the Hebrew alphabet. This is the letter Nun with a numerical value of 50. This is what it looks like. This is the regular form. Nun is another one of those letters, like two we've seen before, like Kaf and Mem, that has two forms. So the Nun looks like this when it is either beginning a word or in the middle of a word somewhere. And I wanted to point out that because some letters I think it's true in English too, but some letters are very distinctive looking and easy to find, and others look similar to other letters. So I wanted to show you that the regular Nun somewhat resembles this letter, which you have seen before. This is the Bet or the Vet. It's the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And you see that it has some similarity. Now, the two differences are that the arms, like the top and the bottom in the Nun, are shorter. They extend a little bit further in the Bet or in the Vet. And also, in most fonts, you see over here, there's like an extra piece on the lower right that does not exist in the Nun. So those are two ways that that you can distinguish between these two letters. And this is the final form. This form of the Nun is basically just a straight line. When it's handwritten, it's just a straight line that goes below the line of text. So Nun, I think I wrote it, but I don't know if I mentioned this, that Nun makes the N sound. So Mem and Nun, it's very helpful because they sound like what their names are in terms of for an English speaker. And I just gave you here 3 examples of words that begin with the letter Nun. One is neshama, that's probably a word you know, that means the soul. A ner is a candle. So when we say the blessing on candle lighting, we say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. That is a candle. And a miracle, which we just experienced, is a nace. Okay. And that's Nun Samach. We haven't learned the Samach yet, but there's some words that begin with Nun. Okay. And now let's turn our attention. Let me just find my notes. Sorry about that. Okay. We are going to talk about some of the deeper symbolism of Passover. And you know, I don't know why it takes me a while to get my screen set up the way that I want it. Give me one more second. I need to see my notes and you guys side by side. That's the issue. Okay. All right. So I started preparing and I realized, as I mentioned in the group, that there's a tremendous amount to share. And so I picked 9 sort of subtopics because there's so much to discuss about the deeper meaning of aspects of Passover, about the Seder, that it's really hard to know where to start and where to end. But my goal is to give you a small taste, not a full meal, of the deeper significance of every aspect of the Passover Seder. And today, in my own learning, I was studying with one of my teachers, and she told me something I had never learned before about this deeper idea of the significance um, of the vegetable that we dip in salt water at the very beginning of the Seder. And it blew my mind because, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I just had never known it. Every year, new Haggadot, new books that come out with the Passover Seder and with commentary, and each one expands on the text in a new way. Can I ask you guys that are not muted to please mute yourself, because I'm getting a lot of background noise? That would be Kathy Morgan and Carrie and Laura Densmore, and everybody else is muted. Okay, great. Laura, can you mute yourself, please? And also Carrie?
I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm trying. I don't know. Sorry.
There you go. That's good. Okay. So we are in the month of Nisan, which is a month of redemption. And um, so the Haggadah itself is a very complicated, layered rabbinic text. You might think that since Passover is all about the Exodus from Egypt, that what we would do at a Passover Seder is just tell the story, like read the verses from Tanakh that are part of the Passover story. And that's in fact not what we have. The Haggadah, how many of you have seen a Haggadah? Can you raise your hand if you've ever seen a traditional Jewish Haggadah? Okay, so actually not all of you have, or I don't. Okay, so it's much more than a retelling of the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, um, so it is almost impossible to overestimate the importance of the Exodus from Egypt, of this event in Jewish history. In Hebrew, we call it Yetziat Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means Egypt. Even today, like in the news, if there's a story of something that's happening in Egypt, the word we use is Mitzrayim. And Yetziat means to exit from. Okay, so when Jews talk about the Exodus from Egypt, we call it Yetziat Mitzrayim. It is a story that's told in the biblical books of Shemot, which is Exodus, Vayikra, which is Leviticus, Bamidbar, which is Numbers, and Devarim, which is Deuteronomy. It is told in 4 of the 5 books, and aspects of the Exodus from Egypt, of Yetziat Mitzrayim, are remembered obviously on Pesach, but also on Shavuot, on Shavuos, where we receive the Torah, okay, which happened during that 40-year process in the desert, and also Sukkot, which is the huts that we build are reminiscent of the years that we spent wandering in the desert. It is mentioned in the Shema prayer, which is the central Jewish prayer that we say twice a day. It is in the Friday night blessing over the wine. It is mentioned during the morning prayer. It is mentioned in grace after meals. It's just everywhere. This theme of this miracle that God did, taking this people from slavery to redemption, is just repeated and woven into the Jewish experience every single day. That's until the final redemption comes. When the final redemption comes, it will be even more great. But just so you have some idea of the reverence for this story that exists in a Torah lifestyle, it just cannot be overestimated. Okay, because we mention it every single day in our prayers. I want to start with some numbers, because certain numbers are significant in the Seder, and I want to look specifically at the number 3, the number 4, the number 10, and the number 15. Now, if you know anything about the Passover Seder, you probably already know what some of these numbers represent, but let's start with 3. Okay, so the first thing is that we have three matzot on the table, three sheets of matzah. And some say that these three matzahs represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, let me just stop here and say this. I know that in the Messianic world, there has been a rewriting of the Jewish understanding of some of these symbols of Passover, and they have been taught in a way that makes them represent something that that is Christian. Okay, so I'm not interested in that retelling. I'm going to tell you just like the traditional perspective that the three matzot represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They also are said to represent Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, which are regarding temple service. The three. They're not tribes. They are castes of Jews that have different responsibilities regarding the temple. But there's also three symbols on the Passover table that are very important. And there's a quote from the Haggadah itself that Rabban Gamliel used to say, whoever has not explained the following three things on Passover has not fulfilled his duty. Pesach, matzah, and maror. These are the three essential parts of this Seder. Okay. Pesach, even though that's the name of the holiday, it refers to the Passover sacrifice. Okay. We use a shank bone most traditionally, but the truth is that we use a chicken wing. And I'm not recommending this, and this is totally like not kosher to what I'm going to say, but I was once with a family that used a milk bone dog biscuit to represent the Passover sacrifice. Okay, they were not so connected, but anyway, the Passover sacrifice that the Jews in Egypt gave to thank God for the miracle of passing over their houses during the 10th plague, in which all of the firstborn of Egypt died. So it is a sacrifice of gratitude, and that's what that's one of the things that it represents. What do we learn from this? That just as the Jews thank God for passing over their houses and protecting them from the fate of the Egyptians, we can learn to thank God for everyday miracles when we are spared from harm in the first place. Now, I wrote this and realized how incredibly connected that is to what we just experienced Saturday night. Okay, so this Passover, if you're going to be at a Seder, if you are going to do a Seder in your home, it's a good time to think about all of the hidden and open miracles that God has done for you in the past year, and to thank Him for the incalculable number of moments in which He saved you from harm without you even necessarily realizing it. So that's so Pesach is in that sense connected to gratitude. Matzah, is the unleavened bread that the Israelites brought with them when they left Egypt. Matzah, one of the many lessons of matzah is that God doesn't need time to prepare. He can save us in an instant. He can turn everything around in a moment, and we should never give up hope. So even when things are going well, when we are healthy, when we have enough money, when we have a roof over our heads, when our car starts in the morning, when we go to drive somewhere, when the people in our family are treating each other with love and respect, whatever it is for you, when things are going well, this is also an ongoing miracle. Like, the sun comes up every day. That's an ongoing miracle, and God is with us in that moment when everything is proceeding the way that we think it should. And so when we look at the matzah, one thought is to think about times in your life when everything turned around in a moment without any effort on your part, and how God can do that for you today, no matter what your challenges are. I'm going to tell you a personal story. So we made Aliyah in 2010, and our youngest daughter was still a minor. Now, this daughter is from a previous marriage. She's going to be 30 years old this year. But at the time, she was still a minor. And in order to have her leave the US, I needed to get permission from my ex-husband, who was her father. And that everything rested on that, because obviously I was not going to leave. I was not going to move to Israel without her. And all of that depended on him. And we did not have the most harmonious relationship. And I was in a position of having to ask him to sign a paper saying he's giving us, me and my current husband, who raised her, um, permission to take her out of the country and to bring her to Israel. And so I remember sitting in the car, but we made an appointment to go see him, and we're sitting in the car with this piece of paper. And this moment, when I ask him to sign the paper, he either is going to sign it and make it possible for us to come to Israel, or he's going to say no. And that means that she was 15 at the time. So that means I would have had to wait until she was 18 before I could come to Israel. He did sign the paper, by the way, and we did bring her. But that was a moment where I really felt like God was with me in that moment when everything turned around, because had he said no, that would have put the kibosh on the whole plan. Okay. So think about times in your life, um, when God did something for you that changed everything for the good. Okay, so we've talked about two of the three symbols. One is the Pesach sacrifice itself. There's a sacrifice of gratitude. The matzah, that refers to the fact that God can save us from whatever difficulties we have. We say in Hebrew kaharif ayin, which means in the blink of an eye. And in a sense, even though it took a couple of hours, last Saturday night we got the notice that the rockets, the missiles, the drones, that they had all been launched, and we knew it would be a couple of hours before they entered Israeli airspace. So it wasn't exactly in the blink of an eye, but in the way that God counts time, it really was. So we went from being fearful and not knowing what was going to happen to being to being saved in what is equivalent a very short amount of time. Okay, maror. Maror is the bitter herb that reminds us of the tears that the Israelites cried when they were slaves in Egypt. And one of the things it teaches us is that when we're going through challenging or seemingly bitter times, that there is sweetness and light and hope that are just around the corner. So Mara reminds us not to avoid the hard things, not to avoid the obstacles, but to recognize them as part of the process of success. That without tears and prayer, the children of Israel would not have been able to leave Egypt. Without the bitterness and struggle, we human beings, we can't reach our full potential. If everything is just so easy. Let's take the example of a muscle. Okay, if the muscle is never challenged, it doesn't grow strong. It just atrophies. Okay, so the same is true for us and our personalities and our relationship with God. If we are never challenged, then we don't reach our full potential. So when you look at the maror, the bitter herb, the horseradish, or some people use romaine lettuce, you can think of a struggle that you've gone through in the past year and how it helped you become the person that you are today. So Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, matzah and maror symbolize gratitude and hope, and the view toward a more promising future. We're going to talk a little bit. I hope I get to that part where it was necessary for the children of Israel to go through the process of slavery, and what it did for us to refine us and prepare us to accept the Torah on Mount Sinai. But right now I want to transition into, that was three. I want to transition into four. And there are four things that come up again and again. There's the four questions, usually it's said the four sons, but I prefer to say the four children. And there's also the four cups. So an important part of the Seder is the 4 cups of wine or grape juice that are drunk throughout the evening at specific times. Just like the 3 matzahs are said to represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 4 cups of wine are said to represent the the four mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, because it said that the slavery from Egypt, redemption from the slavery in Egypt, was in the merit of the righteous women. So matzah represents what is hidden, and it is the mother. That is a role in a Jewish family, generally the mother, who instills in her children the depth of holiness and the purity of Judaism. So that's one way of understanding the four cups. But here's something else that comes straight out of the Bible. The four cups represent four expressions of redemption. If you look in Shemot, if you look in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, I will read it to you in English, and then I will tell you how this corresponds to the four cups, okay? So God is telling Moses, therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will save you from their labor. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment, and I will take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you, and you will know that I am the Lord your God who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. Okay? So in Hebrew, these four expressions of redemption are like this. V'hotzeti, I will take you out. God removed the burden of slavery even before we left Egypt. Slavery ended in Tishrei, which is in the fall, but we didn't leave until Nisan, which is 6 months later. Okay, so for that 6-month period, while all the plagues were going on and all that, this slavery was not happening. The Israelite people were not ready yet to leave, but they were not under the burden of slavery anymore. V'hitzalti, I will rescue you. Literally, God took us out of Egypt. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. This refers to the miracle of the splitting of the sea, that the Israelites no longer had to worry. I'm assuming, by the way, that you guys are familiar with the biblical story, so I'm not going through that. But if you have any questions, you can obviously ask me. The Israelites no longer had to worry about the Egyptians catching up to them because they were drowned at the sea. And they say that the punishment that God inflicted at the sea was 5 times more than the 10 plagues. So we have the Tzeti, V'Tzalti, V'Ga'alti, and V'Lachachti. I will take you to me as a people. This happened when God gave us the Torah. This was the whole purpose of the Exodus. And so these four expressions of redemption that are embedded in these verses in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, these four verbs in Hebrew are symbolized, or they are remembered with these four cups. Okay. Now, at the Seder, we actually pour but do not drink a 5th cup. This is referred to as, in Hebrew, Kos Eliyahu, or the cup of Elijah, because in the next verse, in Exodus chapter 6, verse 8, there's one additional promise. Veheveti, I will bring you to the land concerning which I raise my hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. So the rabbis see the 5th cup as symbolizing the final redemption. Redemption is the theme of the month of Nisan. It's the theme of the Seder. And the redemption from Egypt is a precursor to Geula, to the full redemption. Okay, so we've done a little bit of the deeper significance of the numbers 3 and 4. And trust me when I tell you, I'm giving you like a morsel and not a full meal because we just have an hour. Okay, but let's talk about the significance of the 10. When I say 10 and Passover, what comes to mind? Unmute yourself and jump in.
Plagues.
Plagues.
Legs.
Exactly, the 10 plagues. We have a concept in Hebrew called mida keneged mida. Literally, it's translated as measure for measure. The idea is that God didn't punish the Egyptians randomly with these plagues. Each plague was a specific response to something the Egyptians did to the Israelites when they were slaves. And I want to go through that with you. Okay. So the first plague in Hebrew is called dam. Dam means blood. So this is the water turning to blood. And there's two understandings of this. One is, I'm sure there's many more, but I'm going to tell you two. Okay, one is that there's a concept in Jewish family life where a woman, before she is intimate with her husband at the end of her period, she immerses in a mikveh, which is a spiritual purification that has nothing to do with her being unclean. It has to do with it's a very deep idea, but it is part of a Jewish marriage that every month that a woman will immerse in a mikveh before she is reunited with her husband after a period. Okay, it's more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. The Egyptians saw that the children of Israel would immerse in a mikveh, and so they withheld water from them so they couldn't do that because they wanted to stop them from procreating. So God turned all of the Egyptians' water to blood. That's one opinion. Another is that the Egyptians, we know about building the pyramids, but there were many other kinds of tasks that the Egyptians forced the Israelites to do. And one of them was to draw water for them. So that's another reason. So they used water as a sort of a weapon against the Israelite slaves. And so God turned their water into blood. You with me? How this goes? So it's not random. The next plague is called Sfardea in Hebrew, the plague of the frogs. The Egyptians, for fun, told the children of Israel to go and bring them insects and other disgusting creatures so they could play with them. So God brought frogs on the Egyptians to the extent that the sounds of the frogs was so overwhelming. It was inside them. It was everywhere. This was not just like a few frogs hanging around. Like the frogs jumped inside of the mouths and into the stomachs of the Egyptians. That's how prevalent it was. Okay, so that was a punishment for forcing I'm trying to be very careful about not calling them Jewish slaves because we weren't Jews yet. This is way earlier in history. But the Israelite slaves from forcing them to go and collect disgusting creatures and insects and so forth. The next plague is called kinim in Hebrew, which means lice. And so one opinion is that the Egyptians would make the Israelite slaves sweep their houses, their streets, their markets, and so God changed all of the dust in Egypt into lice until there was no more dust to sweep. Another reason is that the Egyptians prevented the slaves from taking baths and washing their clothes, and so all of that ill will was converted into lice that would plague them. Okay. The next plague is Arov, which is wild beasts. And similar to the whole disgusting frog thing, the Egyptians told the Israelite slaves to go and bring bears and lions. They would make games and contests with the animals. So God brought all of the wild animals against the Egyptians. I'm going to continue, but I think you see the theme of if you abuse the slaves with something, God is going to turn that thing in the material world against you. The next plague is called Dever, which is the pestilence of livestock. So one of the tasks that the Egyptians gave to the Israelite slaves was to make them shepherds of horses and camels and donkeys and cows and sheep. And so a sickness came and killed all the animals that the slaves were. There was no more animals left for them to shepherd. The next plague is called shechin in Hebrew. It's boils. And this is a very sick thing. But when the Egyptians wanted to take a bath, if the water was too hot, they would make a slave get in the hot water to cool it off. And if the water was too cold, they made a slave get in the water first to theoretically to warm it up. So boils come on them in order that they are unable to wash either in hot or cold water. Another reason is that the slavery was so intense that the children of Israel didn't even have a moment to scratch themselves during their hard work. So the Egyptians were punished with ceaseless need to scratch their skin. We're almost finished. This is number 7, I think. Barad is hail. The Egyptians made the Israelites plant their personal gardens and vineyards and trees and orchards. So hail was brought upon them and broke up everything that the Israelites planted, that they shouldn't benefit from the work of the slaves. Arba is locusts. The Egyptians made the children of Israel farm wheat and barley and beans and lentils. So the locusts came and ate up all of that. So the Egyptians could not benefit from it. These are the last two. Choshek is darkness. So there's a midrash that when an Egyptian would eat a meal at night, this is before electric lights, he would bring in an Israelite slave to sit opposite him and light a lamp and put it on the head of the slave. And he would say to the slave, make sure you don't bend your head from side to side, otherwise I'll cut your head off, for the duration of the meal. So the slave was required to light up the area where the Egyptian was eating. And so they were punished with darkness. And the last one is a little bit more straightforward, Makorot Bechorot, the killing of the firstborn children. The simplest understanding is that the Egyptians wanted to kill the children of Israel, and so God killed the Egyptians. But there's another idea that the entire time that the children of Israel were in exile, and it says in the Bible 400 years, but in actuality it was 210 years, that Rachel, our mother Rachel, cries over her children not once, but the entire time that they are in exile. And because the Egyptians were so harsh to her offspring, she was crying the entire time. So God punished them with crying out loud because of the death of their firstborn. Okay, here we go to the significance of 15. There's two things I want to tell you about 15. 15 may be less familiar to you as a number that's associated with the Passover Seder. 15 steps of the Seder, in one understanding, represent the human lifespan and the spiritual journey that we go on. So the first step of the Seder in Hebrew is called Kadesh, which is the blessing on the wine. And that represents the holy and the pure and the untarnishable soul that comes into the world. And so here we're talking about the stage of conception and birth. Orchatz is the second step of the Seder, where we wash our hands without making a blessing, because at birth we are washed and we wash newborns. Okay. Then we have the stage of youth. Karpas is the eating of a green vegetable dipped in salt water, and that is a spring vegetable. It's a symbol of youth. Then we have yachatz, which is breaking the middle matzah, and that is associated with the loss of innocence. So now we've done conception, birth, and youth. Let's talk about the psychological maturity. So the next step is called Magi. That is telling the story. That's the biggest chunk. And again, it isn't just reading the verses from the book of Exodus. It is as we tell our story in life, we reflect on our path, on our decisions, on their consequences, on the nature of life and the point of it all. And that is reaching a level of psychological maturity. And then the rest of the steps on one level symbolize spiritual maturity. What is that? What do I mean by this? So the next step is called rachatz in Hebrew. That means washing your hands a second time with a bracha, which is associated with repentance, with teshuvah, which cleanses us from damage that we've done to ourselves due to bad decisions that we've made. That is rachatz. Motzi is where we make a blessing on the matzah, that we acknowledge that just as there is a higher power who brings us bread from seed to table, there's a higher power that's working in our lives. So now we're becoming spiritually mature individuals, and we understand something of the foolish things that we did as younger people, and what is necessary to be a spiritually mature person. The next step is matzah, which is actually eating the matzah. Seder night is the only time in the Jewish calendar where it's actually a mitzvah to eat. This is where, so eating is a physical desire, the physical desire for food that's always with us, and it aligns with a spiritual law. It's a mitzvah to eat. So it's spiritual and physical together. That is one of the hallmarks of a spiritually mature person, is to use things in the physical world to help us grow spiritually. So just to give you another example of this, on Shabbat, Shabbat candles, traditional Shabbat candles are very, very simple. It's some white wax and a wick. It's not one of those fancy dinner candles or a scented candle, and you could use those, but in general, we take the basic elements of the physical world and we elevate them at a particular time in a particular way with particular words. So I'll tell you, I'm just thinking of this now, so I didn't prepare it, but try to picture in your mind a Jewish star that has a triangle with the point facing up and an overlapping triangle with the point facing down. Can you picture what I'm saying? The triangle with the point facing down represents the spiritual role of men in this world, in that through their prayer and through their Torah study, they bring down spiritual richness from above. And women are represented by the triangle that's flat on the bottom and points up, because we take the physical elements of life and elevate them. So another example of that would be gestation. Okay, so you take this very simple physical element of two selves, and through the process of a woman's body, she elevates that into becoming a full human being. But another example is the Shabbat candles that I gave you, that you take a very simple piece of white wax with a little cotton wick, and you have created the vehicle through which Shabbat enters into your home. That was an aside. I just thought of that, but it's interesting, and I wanted to share it. Okay. So again, just to review, matzah represents where our physical desire aligns with our doing God's will. Maror is bitter herbs, and this is the remorseful aspect of repentance. Regret for times that we undermined ourselves, that we didn't reach our true potential, that we went off course, and so forth. Korech is the sandwich that we make that combines matzah and maror together. And this is an expansion of our ability as spiritually mature people to live with paradox. That, for example, paradox that God is good and does good all the time, and sometimes we're in pain. Paradox that we don't always understand why people hate. Well, this is my paradox. You may share it. Why do people hate my people so much that they send 300 plus drones and missiles directed at us in order to kill us? Like it's a paradox. Being a spiritually mature person means that you can incorporate both faith in the future redemption and pain over past or current suffering and wrongdoing. That's the symbolism of one of the symbols of eating those two things together. The next stage in the Seder is called Shulchan Aruch, which is, well, literally it's the meal. I mean, that's the stage where we actually eat the soup and the brisket or whatever we're having. But Shulchan Aruch literally means a set table, and it is it is the stage in life where we use everything the way it should be used to serve God. So one example of that would be when you are mature and you have an income. We have a requirement in Jewish law. We have a requirement to give 10% of our income to charity. Okay. So God blesses us with money, and we serve God by giving 10% of that money to charitable causes. Okay. That would be an example of using everything the way it should be used to serve God. Um, the next stage is called in Hebrew tsafun, which is the afikomen. That is where, you remember, we broke the middle matzah. The tradition is you hide the larger piece until this part of the Seder, and then you bring it back to the table and everybody eats some of it. And that's where we find, that's analogous to finding and embracing the broken parts of us in order to become whole. We are all broken by life in different ways. We are all hurt and wounded and so forth. The afikomen represents the the spiritual maturity to embrace the parts of us that are broken. The last three steps of the meal, of the Seder, are Baruch, which is grace after meals. That's where we bless God for our spiritual growth and for whatever healing we've been able to achieve in life. Hallel is praise. That is thanking God for everything. And in Jewish circles, we say we thank God for the concealed good as well as the revealed good. That is for the ordeal and for the redemption, for the slavery and the freedom, for the pain and for the growth that comes from pain. Everything is all part of the oneness of God. Everything is all given to us um, as a package. And Hallel is where we thank God for all of the pieces of being a human and a spiritually mature human. And the very last part is called Nirtza. That's where we say, basically, we say, God, we hope that the Seder that we just had was pleasing to you. And we also sing the very famous song L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And this is where we appreciate that we have, as a result of going through this whole process, going through life with all of its ups and downs and so forth, that we have deepened our relationship with God. So that is one way of understanding a little deeper the 15 steps of the Seder. There's another 15 that we see in the song Dayinu, and this is one of the most famous parts of the Seder, where we thank God for the many miracles that allowed us to break free of the bondage of slavery and escape Egypt. And literally, Dayinu means it would have been enough. And there are many levels of favors and kindness that God did for the children of Israel. So just like the 15 steps of the Seder, Dayinu also has 15 statements, which also corresponds to the number of steps that the Levites stood on when they sang in the temple, which also corresponds to the portion of the book of Tehillim, the book of Psalms, chapter 120 through 135, those 15 chapters, which are all called Shir Hamalot, which is a song of ascents. They all start the same way. All of that is 15. Now, I'm not going to go through all 15, but I want to give you an idea of the translation of Dayinu. And what we are actually saying is that every single thing you did for us, even if it didn't lead to the final conclusion, we're grateful for that. So if God had taken us out of Egypt and not executed judgment on the Egyptians, Dayinu, it would have been enough for us. The meaning, if we had been able to leave and we don't be slaves anymore, and now we're free, but the Egyptians didn't die in the plague of darkness, they didn't die at the Red Sea, we would have been happy. We would appreciate that. If God had executed judgment on the Egyptians and had not executed judgment on their gods, meaning the whole symbolism of the Passover sacrifice was on the animal that the Egyptians treated as their god. Okay, so they didn't just, it was a humiliation for the Egyptians that were that survived the killing of the firstborn. It was humiliating for them to have their god sacrificed by this former slave population. Um, I'll go on. If God had, I'm skipping a few steps just to give you an idea. Um, if God had given us their wealth and had not split the sea for us, it would have been enough. So you may be familiar with the idea that this is it. You'll find this in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 35 and 36. The children of Israel left with much of the wealth of Egypt. And this is the verse. The children of Israel did according to Moses' order. They borrowed from the Egyptians silver objects, golden objects, and garments. The Lord gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they lent them, and they emptied out Egypt. Okay, so God basically gave the wealth of Egypt into the hands of this former slave people. And one of the understandings for this is that Egypt became very wealthy when Joseph was viceroy and was running sort of the economic system of the country, and people from all these other countries needed food. And when they ran out of money to pay for the food, they brought other wealth. And that's how Egypt became wealthy. So in a sense, it wasn't like the, first of all, this was all God ran this whole show, but it wasn't that the children of Israel stole from the Egyptians. It was given willingly. But on a deeper level, it was the restitution that was due to them because it was their forefather, Joseph, who was the one who got all that wealth brought into Egypt before slavery even began. Okay. Um, Here's another Dayenu. If God had taken us through the sea on dry land and had not drowned our enemies in the sea, it would have been enough for us. So let me skip that. Okay, there's lots of miracles that are associated with the sea. That this was the shining moment in Jewish history, and it's remembered in many prayers, including what we call Shirat Hayam, which is in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 15, verses 1 through 18. Um, there's so many miracles, including after the Egyptians were drowned in the sea, the jewels that had decorated the Egyptian chariots washed up on the shore, and the Israelites gathered those riches as well. But there were also many miracles that God did for the children of Israel in the desert years. For example, their clothes never wore out. They couldn't just go to a store and buy new clothes in the 40 years that they were wandering. As the children grew, the clothes grew. And also, they also didn't have laundry facilities, but God created sweet smelling grasses in which the people could roll around and refresh themselves and their clothing, kind of like a shower and laundry in one. Um, Women in the years in the desert, women stopped having their menstrual cycles because that would have been really hard to manage when you're on the move. Um, okay. And here's another one. If God had supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years and had not fed us the manna, Dayenu, it would have been enough for us. Manna, which is called mun in Hebrew, was this miraculous food with which Hashem sustained the population for 40 years until they could get into Israel and plant and harvest food in a more natural way. The Bible says that raw manna, tasted, it had like a sweet honey kind of taste. It's described as having the appearance of like frost on the ground. And the Israelites could grind it and pound it into cakes and bake them, resulting something like a sweet cake that is baked with oil. it was also, I find this fascinating, it was like the perfect food in that it created no waste in the human body, meaning that they didn't have to poop. There was no, they were eating like this food that was ideally aligned with whatever their body needed, and there was no waste product, which also was a tremendous miracle. So we recognize that at every stage in the exodus from Egypt, we were not particularly worthy of receiving the next one, but God, in His infinite mercy, nevertheless granted us the next stage. So the Dayenu song builds on that theme. How does that relate to us today? That we still need to thank God for every stage. That, for example, before we moved into the home that we're living in now, we totally renovated it, and there was a point where they took down all of the walls and took up all of the tile. We were living somewhere else at the time. And so the apartment was still not habitable, but at the stage where the floor tile was laid, we could be grateful for that. It's not the full solution, but it means that now we don't have to walk on mounds of sand to get from one part of the apartment to the other. When the walls went up, when the doors went up, every stage of the process was something to be grateful for, and that's it's a metaphor for life. Um, Also, the idea that redemption happens in stages, and every stage is an important part of the process, even if it's not the final redemption. So some people, when we learned about this onslaught from Iran, some people said, okay, it's time to like really be prepared because Mashiach's going to show up any minute. Okay, that didn't happen yet, but we see that this is a fulfillment of prophecy, this threat from Iran, and the miracle that God did for us just a few days ago. That it's a part of the process, even if we're not fully there yet. I have so much more to say, and I see that I'm almost out of time, so I want to jump ahead just to this in case this is useful for you. These are a couple of ideas for including children in the Passover Seder. There's a tradition that because we are free and we are no longer slaves, that we don't pour our own wine or grape juice. And so one possibility is, if they're capable, if you are going to be at a Passover Seder, if there are children there, that they can be appointed to pour the 4 cups. You can give them like a dish towel on their arm, or put a sign around their neck that says like wine steward, or give them a vest or a bow tie or something to make them feel special, and give them the opportunity to be the ones pouring wine for everybody. Another idea is to prepare a short skit to go away from the table and reenact part of the story, reenact the Egyptians finding all their water turned into blood, or the actual leaving of Egypt. That's another possibility. Another way of including children is to go around the table and to say, when I left Egypt, I took a blank, and the answers need to be in alphabetical order. So the first person would say, when I left Egypt, I took an apple. When I left Egypt, I took a book, A, B. When I left Egypt, I took a crayon, C. Okay, it doesn't have to make sense, but it is just a way of engaging very young people in the story. At the time when we talk about being slaves, we did this one year. It was really it was very memorable. You prepare pillowcases and you put some heavy things in them, and you have the children sling them on their back and carry them from the table to someplace, to the front door, even to the street, to get a sense of what it was like to be a slave carrying a heavy burden. You can put some unusual items on the table, like they have nothing to do with Passover specifically, a shoelace, a toothbrush, a box of tissues, whatever. Put it on the table and ask people to see if they can connect it to the Passover story in any way. Um, and and finally, I'm going to end with this because we're out of time, but I did prepare a whole lot more, but I don't have time to share. At the time that we sing the Dayenu song, it would have been enough. You can go around the table and ask people to share a Dayenu from their lives, a time when God blessed them above and beyond. Okay, so just to conclude, the Passover Seder is layered and layered and layered and layered. I can't overemphasize this enough. Every single thing we do has deeper meaning, and this is why there's a tradition. It even says it in the Haggadah that these certain rabbis were in a city in Israel called Bnei Brak, and they were expounding on the themes of this, what the kinds of things that I spoke about, and much, much, much more until daybreak. Okay. It literally, this is why just reading the Haggadah itself, it can be very confusing. It's very much a rabbinic document. It's not a biblical document, although it obviously has certain passages from Tanakh. But when you add some of these layers into the discussion, it can be a very, very rich experience. So I'll just leave you with this one idea. There was one year when I noticed there was a lot of male stuff going on in the Haggadah, like Rabbi this and male, male, male. And I went to look for where are women represented in the Haggadah. And I found many, many examples. That's a whole class in and of itself. How women connected to the Passover story, different hints in the Hebrew of the Haggadah text itself. But like whatever level you want to approach the Seder or the Passover experience, there's probably a Haggadah that focuses on that because it's just a very deep and rich text. Okay, so I don't know how many of you are, Laura, I see you want to say something. Let me just finish with this. I don't know how many of you are going to have a Passover Seder, participate in one, create one for yourselves, for your community, for your family, whatever. But I hope that, again, my goal was met, which was to just give you a little taste of how much deeper all of this is. I want to hear from Laura, and then I just want to say it is now an hour, so if you have to go, I understand. But if you want to stay, I'm happy to stay with you for a few minutes and answer questions or let's hear your comments. Okay, Laura, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that really rich teaching that you just shared on Passover. I actually have two questions. One is, I don't know if you have time, but if you could, I didn't hear you share anything about when they were instructed to put the blood of the lamb over the doorposts and what the meaning and the significance of that is. That's one question. The other is, I've been taught that the 10 plagues were also something about God striking back the false gods that Egypt worshipped. Like, I don't
Yes.
know if they worshiped the Nile River, and so the river turning to blood was God striking back against this false god that the Egyptians were worshiping. So, you know, maybe you could comment on
Okay,
those two
so
things.
the second thing, let me comment on first, and that is, as I was saying, everything that's part of this text and that's part of this story exists on multiple levels. And so both are true and they're not contradictory because God's brain, that's not a good way of saying it, but the way that God perceives the world is so multidimensional. And when we study Torah, we get a little window into that. And so it is it is a big part of my desire to bring to people who learn the Bible in a Christian way the awareness that there are many, many more levels that everything functions on. And so
Mm.
I named one and you named another. And I promise you that if we were to look at it, there are many more levels at which, and they don't contradict each other because God's infinite intelligence is infinitely complex and all of these things can be true at the same time. So I didn't mean to suggest that it was only punishment, that the 10 plagues were only punishment for things that they did against the slaves, because what you said is 100% also true. As far as the blood over the doorpost, I did not prepare that. If you tell me something little more specifically what you want to know, then I will look into it and I will put an answer in the group. What are you asking about it? Now you're muted and I can't hear you.
Oh, so I don't know if this is true or not, but I don't know if the names of the false gods of Egypt were inscribed on the doorposts. And so in applying the blood over the doorposts, they were basically blotting out the names of the false gods. And that there's something very significant about the threshold, that it was God instigating and initiating a threshold covenant with his people with blood.
Okay. Let me look into that, because now you're
Okay.
the second person who's asked me this blood theme.
Yeah.
So,
And then the last thing I want to say is that I think that this Passover, and I've celebrated many of them, and maybe many of you might feel the same way, is going to be very, very special because of what Israel just came through. The miracle, the attempt to try to annihilate Israel with all of those missiles, and the incredible miracle that God did in preserving and protecting, and 99% of them being destroyed before they ever even got into airspace. It's like Pharaoh, in the spirit of Pharaoh operating through Iran is raising itself up. And here God has done a miracle, and it's just the prelude of more to come. So I think this Passover will be very, very special.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question or a comment before we go? Helen, do you want to say something? You unmuted yourself.
Well, Laura just asked my question, so
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, good. So I will look that up and try to get you more information about the threshold and the blood and the lamb. Lori, you want to say something?
Yeah, I need a question on clarification. I've got two calendars that list the Hebrew feasts and festivals, the Jewish festivals. Which date is correct for Erev Pesach?
It is Monday night, the 22nd. What does yours say?
Well, this calendar is from, it has that date. This is from, I don't know, David Necretman, Zion's Gate. And the other from Mark Biltz, and it says Erev Pesach is on the 21st, so Sunday night. But we'll follow the other one, correct?
Right. If you want to do it what the Jews do.
Yeah, that's the point. I want to do that.
Yeah.
There's an error. I'm going to contact Pastor Mark and see what's going on with that. But because he typically follows with so the 22nd. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, everybody. I wish you a good week. And we are not meeting next week because it will be Passover for me. And so when we come back, I didn't want you to think that I was not going to address the next time that we meet, and I'll send you the date. But the next time that we meet, it will be, we will go back to the anti-Semitism theme.
Brilliant.
Temporarily interrupted. I am planning on addressing that. All right. All right.
Thank you
so much.
For those of you that are going to have a Passover experience, I wish you a good one, and Chag Sameach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.